Is it fair to say, Rabbi Landis, that the Zionist movement, as it picked up steam, ignited the imagination of world Jewry, at least even Eastern European Jewry, and as a result, there was opposition? And what forms of opposition were there to the Zionist movement?
So that's a great question. All the questions you have are great questions. So, I don't think there's such a thing as any Jewish movement or Jewish idea that doesn't have resistance. So there was definitely, the answer is yes. It definitely ignited the minds of many of the European Jewry, of many amongst European Jewry. Now that ignition was different, whether it was in Eastern Europe versus Western Europe. And Eastern Europe, it was the lights are shutting out. Let's get out of here, as we spoke about before. And Western Europe, the lights aren't shutting out. Everything's great for the Jews in Western Europe. Okay, a little thing here and there, but we ain't going anywhere. But we need a Jewish home, at least for Eastern European Jews, for people to run away from anti-Semitism. That we need. So it definitely ignited, on both Western and Eastern European Jewry, and trickle over to the Western to the West as well, to America. But with any ignition of a movement, there comes controversy, and the controversy came from I would say from three major places. First of all, the Reform movement, which was already a force to reckon with within Western European Jewry, not so much in Eastern Europe, but for sure in Western Europe. The Reform movement bitterly opposed Zionism in its early movements, in its early days. The Reform movement, as a movement, had already essentially erased Zionism from the Jewish story, from their Jewish story that they were writing. They'd taken references to Zion and to return to Israel, to return to Jerusalem out of their prayer book, and really had written it out of the religion in a major way. Again, their form of the religion, and that's why I always say today the Reform movement's trying to get a hold in the land of Israel is having a very hard time. It's like someone saying, "Have pity on me because I'm an orphan after I killed my parent," because they really did a lot to try and thwart the Zionist movement in its early days. And it won't be until after 1948, or in some cases long after 1948, that the Reform movement will kind of get on board. Now, it's not to say there weren't members of the Reform movement who will join the Zionist movement before that. There are definitely individuals. Here in Cleveland, there was Abba Hillel Silver, who was a big Reform rabbi and definitely an active Zionist. There were definitely others like him who were pre-state Zionists, but at least in these early days, late 19th century, early 20th century, the Reform movement was in opposition. The Bund, the Jewish communists, were in opposition because they claimed that Zionism. Begin once asked one of the Bundist leaders he had an association with. He said, "Why are you against us? We're a lot of people are trying to form a socialist state when they get to when they get to Israel." And the response was, "It's because you take all the great minds from communism and you make them Zionists." But they saw that they saw a threat to their sort of communist ideal that they were trying to put forward. They saw a threat there, and then amongst the Orthodox community, it was very split. Now there was, we mentioned some great Orthodox minds that were very much part of Chovei Tzion before, Tzirish Kalisher, Rishon Molva, and then Netziv, but there are others who are very against it. And the idea really comes from how we understand the Gemara in Ketuvos, the Gemara in the Talmud in Ketuvot, page 110b, Kuf Yod Amud Beis, where it talks about the three vows that were taken at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, and one of those is that the Jews would not the language of the Gemara is b'chema, which means with the wall, basically, but not in force go back, or in mass go back to the land of Israel. And there's all kinds of interpretations. The Rambam, the Ramban, the Maharal, Chaim Vital is supposed to, what this means. Was it only limited to 1,000 years? But there are those sort of hardliners like Rabbi Teitelbaum, the Satmar who believe that's in effect. This Zionist stuff, this is not a Jewish thing. Until today, really the descendants of Rabbi Teitelbaum, the Satmar Chassidim, and the different offshoots are very opposed to the Zionist idea. Now it's important. I always think it's important, not exactly the discussion now, but important to make the distinction between the Neturei Karta and Satmar. They're not one and the same. They're very, very different. the Satmarov once visited Eretz Yisrael, and someone asked if he was going to meet with Arafat, and he said, Arafat, why would I meet with him? He kills Jews. So there's a big distinction between, this sort of, we'll call it the anti-Zionist Hasidic movement, and it's like many things Jewish. It's not in any way monolithic, but that's sort of the hardline approach. But even less than that, there was a lot of opposition within the Orthodox community. It's interesting to point out that the founding of Agudas Yisrael is not often talked about, but the founding of Agudas Yisrael, where did Agudas Yisrael come from? Well, Agudas Yisrael was an offshoot of Mizrahi. Mizrahi was the Torah nationalist movement of the Torah nationalist wing of the Zionist organization. And for the first roughly 10 years of the Zionist organization, it was one organization kind of uniting Torah Jewry, the Torah Jewry that let's say took a more liberal approach to the Gemara and Kesuvos, and said that no, maybe we can return to Israel. Maybe we do need to have a hand in this return. That was represented by Mizrahi, and it was really kind of, for the most part, united front until 1912. Now, what happens in 1912 is at the 10th Zionist Congress, there was a motion put forth by Mizrahi that in the future Jewish state, that religious schools would be funded by the state, which ended up happening, but the proposal was rejected by the Zionist Congress, and so at that point, Agudas Yisrael, or what became Agudas Yisrael, group broke away from Mizrahi and formed their own movement, which became known as Agudas Yisrael, and again took kind of a middle road approach that Mizrahi within the Orthodox community was saying they were fully on board with the Zionist movement. You had the Satmar and the offshoots of the Satmar Hasidim saying we're fully against this, and they had Agudas Yisrael kind of in the middle, saying we're on board, but we're not completely on board. We're taking a wait and see approach, and that's kind of always been the approach of Aguda, to be sort of involved in the discussion. Very much involved in the government today in Israel, but not necessarily with the religious fervor of the Mizrahi movement, which parenthetically did not start off with as religious fervor. It was really practical, and then with Rav Kook became more religious in nature. So like anything Jewish, you had really, I think, those three different prongs of resistance going on within the Jewish world. And to that end, the Zionist movement in pre-state Israel, and really in the first few decades of the modern state of Israel, it will not be a majority of the Jewish world. It won't be. These groups really represent the majority of the Jewish world, and therefore it'll be in many ways a fringe movement that will somehow be very, very successful in its actions. It gets to the point where by the 1950s, it is the majority.